Dan Lewis here. This is lecture number 7. I hope you're doing well with this series of lectures. We've covered quite a lot of material, and hopefully between what I'm saying and what you're seeing on the PowerPoints, you are able to widen your knowledge base of how the Bible has come to us. In the last lecture, we talked about two translation approaches, functional equivalence and formal equivalence. Formal equivalence is word for word, or at least the attempt to be very close to that. Functional equivalence, on the other hand, is idiomatic and tries to reproduce in the second language the idioms of the first language, but in the style of the second language. Here in this lecture, we want to talk about translation theory that seeks for a balance between those two polarities, sort of a middle ground, if you will. There are a number of English translations that attempt to maintain a middle ground between formal equivalence and functional equivalence. And these translators use word-for-word techniques at some points, but they will resort to functional equivalence at other points where it is necessary for a clear understanding. And so essentially they are using both of those theories and trying to balance them out to be faithful to the text of the Old and the New Testaments. To guard against theological bias, many times these translations are produced by translators that work in committees that are drawn from different denominations. So for instance, the New International Version of the Bible is produced by scholars from a wide evangelical denominational background. Some of them are Lutherans, some of them are Presbyterians, some of them are Baptists, some of them are Pentecostals, but they come from a wide range. And that way, not any one denomination would be able to hold the day on some theological point that depends upon the translation. Middle ground translations would include some of these. The New Testament in Modern Speech by Richard Weymouth, which is early in the 20th century. The New Testament in Plain English by Charles Williams. The New Jerusalem Bible, which is produced by Roman Catholics. The New American Bible, which is also a Roman Catholic translation. The New International Version, which is currently one of the most popular versions in the English world. The New Revised Standard Version, which, as you might suspect, is a revision of the Revised Standard Version. And the New Living Translation, which was produced back in the mid-1990s. The risk of trying to be in the middle, and this is generally true in all sorts of things in life. This is true in politics, it's true in religion, but the risk of being in the middle is that you can get shot from people on both sides. And to some degree, I suppose the risk is that way in Bible translation as well. But the risk of attempting a middle ground between two poles of translation theory is that as the reader, and if you don't know Hebrew and you don't know Aramaic and you don't know Greek, you can't really tell which part is more word for word and which part is more concept for concept. And often these will lie side by side in the translation. As you look at this, now look on the right side of the screen at how the New International Version has translated this Greek passage. The NIV says, "So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view." If you look at this carefully, you will notice that the first part of the sentence, "So from now on, we regard no one," is almost word for word from the Greek text. But the last part of the sentence, "a worldly point of view," captures the phrase in Greek, "according to flesh." So what the NIV has done is they have used word for word where they can, but because the phrase "according to flesh" may not be fully understood by an English reader, they have given a modern idiomatic rendering, which is a worldly point of view. And of course, the Greek text doesn't actually say worldly point of view, it says according to flesh. As a reader of the text, unless you are familiar with Greek, you wouldn't be able to tell which part of this was word for word and which part was concept for concept. At the same time, the translators who are doing this are trying to be faithful to the meaning of the original text of Scripture. They're certainly not trying to deceive anyone. They're trying to be faithful to that meaning, to render that meaning in ways that will be as readable as possible to a modern English person. Another really big issue in the modern world is gender sensitivity, particularly now that in almost all public writing, people are expected to be sensitive to gender. You're not supposed to talk about women as though they're men, or mixed groups as though they're men, even though that may be the older tradition. So translations also often have to address this factor. Let's take a look at how this is done, because often what is done in modern English when we try to produce a politically correct rendering of something, we change singular pronouns to plural pronouns, because in English, singular pronouns are usually gender specific, like he and she, whereas plural pronouns are generally gender neutral, they and them. So if you look at the New International Version, it says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." Here you will notice that the two pronouns, him and me, are masculine pronouns. In fact, this is exactly what the Greek text says. However, in trying to take this same text and make it gender neutral, the NIVI has changed those singulars to plurals. So here it says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them, and they with me." Now, in changing those singulars to plurals, we have escaped the problem of gender bias. But at the same time, we have changed singulars to plurals. And so here the singular pronouns being changed to plurals to accommodate gender sensitivity seems to sacrifice something in the text, the idea that an individual person can have a relationship with Jesus Christ rather than a group of persons. And so what the reader gains in political correctness seems to be lost with respect to the individual's relationship to the Lord. Here's another example, this one from what is billed by the translators as a less homophobically translated passage. And in this case, the meaning, I think, is compromised. This is from the Good as New Bible produced in Great Britain. Here in Romans 1, it says, "God let them go on to pursue their selfish desires. Women use their charms to further their own ends. Men, instead of being friends, ruthlessly exploit one another." Now, if you've never read this passage in any other translation, you may say, "Yeah, that sounds pretty good. That sounds okay." But if you read this in a more word-for-word translation, you're going to get quite a shock. The Revised Standard Version translates it this way: "For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. Their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error." Now, it's quite apparent that in the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, this text, which is pretty much word for word from the Greek text, is aiming at the immorality of the gay lifestyle. But if you read the Good as New Bible, which neutralizes all of that, it takes all of the sting out of that passage and just says men, instead of being friends, ruthlessly exploit one another, which is much more general than the Greek text itself reads. Now, it's probably beyond reasonable expectation that we think that all Christians ought to learn Hebrew or learn Greek. That's probably not going to happen, and in fact, it'll be only the rare person that will do that. But lay Christians should be advised to look at multiple translations of the Bible. I would recommend that they have a good formal equivalence Bible and that they have a good functional equivalence Bible as well, and maybe one that's in the middle, one that tries to strike a middle ground and compare the passages one with another. And it's also important to become knowledgeable about the translator's theological orientation. If a translator does not actually believe in the inspiration of the Bible or doesn't believe in the morals that are described in the Bible, they're going to tend to translate the Bible in ways that are consonant with their own viewpoint. And so it's important for you to know where people are coming from, where the translators are coming from. This is often very directly addressed in the preface to Bible translations. If you look, for instance, at the preface to the New International Version or the preface to the New American Standard Bible, you will find that they will set out very clearly what their orientation is and how they're going to approach the translation of the sacred text of Scripture. So with that in mind, we are going to end this 7th lecture, and in our next lectures we're going to look at the canon of the Old and the New Testaments.